Survivor Specialist Phil and Alexa are back with our episode 11 recap of Survivor China. Andy ripped apart this episode last week, and I am now coming to you all saying I quite enjoyed this episode, even though right before we went live, Alexa said she did not like this episode either. And I say, poo-poo, that is nonsense. This is another great Survivor China episode, and it's not about who gets voted off. It's about everything that builds up to it, because this is old school Survivor, not season 25 on Survivor. Alexa, tell me I'm wrong, and tell me there's something wrong with this episode other than that poor Eric Huffman goes home.
So that part is boring. The whole and I love family visits. Phil's the one who has no heart, can never cry. I couldn't like cry so much with this one because Jeff's not like pulling your heartstrings as much. But this does have, I'll give it this does have just like the great moment of Eric being the one to bring up Todd's sister. Everyone thinks it's Courtney. I thought it was Courtney. Eric's the one who brings it up. He's got a little flair to him.
No, and I remembered it wasn't Courtney who brought it up. It's just Courtney who ends up going in, if you will. She's the one who just keeps on saying how, he was going for the Oscar, and Jeff, my sister, she has lost it so conveniently. It's brutal, but it's also hilarious because it's Courtney. And I mean, obviously it's cringy, but I just think it's so ridiculous. And it makes sense why they were skeptical of him, because he is such a big fan and he is seen as conniving. And the way it comes up, like Todd takes it very, very well, and his sister delivers it pretty well. So he doesn't go like full crying mode. And a lot of people hearing that news would probably literally you see Adam Klein when he hears about his mom from Evan. It's really crazy. So I don't know. I mean, I get why people were skeptical, but it is hilarious that it is Eric of all people who brings this up.
Yeah, Eric, the master conniver here. But yeah, Courtney in her confessional, she also directly references Johnny Fairplay, which I find funny because I think it's pretty clear that Courtney did not really watch Survivor before she went out. So for her to whip that out, I thought was very impressive. Or, maybe someone told her that and then she brings that to the confessional. But you make a good point, because Todd, he doesn't have a super strong reaction. So therefore everyone's going to think it's fake. Like it's almost like oh, you failed the test. Like upset, sad, but not like all in on it. And so maybe that was Todd saying I can't make a big thing of this because, and that maybe had a little reverse psychology on their reaction.
Maybe. Yeah. And it also seemed like it wasn't really a great situation anyway. It seemed like it was his younger sister, and she got pregnant in a way that was not anticipated. And it was only 2 months along. So it kind of seems like it wasn't one of those where it was like, oh no, it's like our 30-year-old married sister who had a miscarriage. It's this. And I think that might have had some effect on it too, because while obviously he's worried about his sister and he's worried about the situation, it might not have been it just might not have felt as impactful as if it had been like a, legit. I mean, at least from what we hear from the survivors. So I think that's what also kind of makes this one difficult. But I mean, again, I think it just goes back to Eric Huffman needed to do everything he possibly could to get anything going in this episode. And Eric always gets ripped on for being the boring one on this season and all that, but Eric plays his ass off just in a way that only he can play, because he has no power the entire game. And he never once has the upper hand in any situation. So he kind of has to just do anything he can, and he does. And I really respect that. And I appreciate that, because there's a lot of survivors who would just be like, well, I'm going to roll over and die here. And in season 15, arguably the worst player on the season that makes the merge. He's playing as hard as he can, and he's doing everything he possibly can to continue to stay in the game and try to break down one of the strongest 3-person / 4-person alliances in the history of the show.
Yeah. And they go to the right person with Denise. Because obviously Denise is already a little questionable. Denise, though, does to end up taking Todd and Amanda when she wins the family reward challenge. But one thing that was interesting to me in Eric and Peih-Gee's pitch to Denise, the pitch was to tie. And that was where I was a little confused, because on a revote, I don't think that would have worked for them. What am I missing on that?
You're not missing anything. And therefore, like I was explaining this because obviously Rachel's never watched the show. So I had explained to her how stupid a tie would be for Denise. And the thing is, it's a good pitch from Eric and Peih-Gee to say to Denise, you could get third place. However, the problem with the pitch is if Denise does this, now Denise has a 1 in 3 chance of getting 6th place, as opposed to having a 0% chance of getting 6th place. And so it's the better move for Denise to go to Final Four the way it is and just try to win that immunity challenge over Todd, Amanda, and Courtney, not very good immunity challenge threats, to try to beat one of them to get into the final 3 rather than do this switch. Because while this switch would be great for Eric and Peih-Gee, and yes, it makes a lot of sense for Denise if she's trying to get 3rd place, because 3rd place is obviously a very good place, but it puts her at risk this episode. And because we hadn't seen a rock draw done properly in Survivor history, they don't really understand that those are the rules. But I'm sure Denise had been explained to by somebody who said, if you do this, you're going to end up putting yourself at risk because Eric will be safe, Todd will be safe, and then it's either you, Courtney, or Amanda who go home. And in reality, Denise wants to sit next to Courtney or Amanda at Final 3 because that's who she can beat.
Yeah. Well, do you think she thinks she can beat Amanda?
I think she probably thinks she has a better shot there than against Todd. Maybe she thinks she has a good shot against Todd, but she needs to keep Courtney. She doesn't want Courtney going home. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So in this situation, really, if she were to tie it, she goes into a situation where 2 of the 3 people, 2 of them, she doesn't want to go home, herself and Courtney. Amanda, sure, whatever. Or you just say goodbye, Eric, and we'll worry about it when we get to the next vote. If Peih-Gee wins immunity, then I'm probably screwed, but maybe I can swing something up and tell Courtney, look, if you want to win, sit next to me and Peih-Gee because you'll win.
Yeah. That's it. Phil, you should have been on there. You should have been chirping in Denise's ear, but it obviously she ends up making the objectively correct decision. But yeah, I mean, they're fighting, and you're right. Like with Peih-Gee having immunity and with Eric getting the votes, then it does make sense from their perspective. I didn't see it that way at first.
And if you remember, that's why Tyson goes to rocks in Blood versus Water, because it's him or it's Sierra or Katie. And he doesn't care if Sierra or Katie go home. So he knows he has a 1 in 3 shot of going home, as opposed to this situation where it would literally be a 100% chance somebody in Denise's alliance going into this episode goes home. That's not very good odds. I hate to tell everybody.
No,
so
that's tough.
Yeah, so she makes the right move here, sticking with them. It does make sense, and for anybody who's watching casually, I think Denise gets misconstrued as stupid on this season, and I think Denise is far from stupid. I think Denise is actually a very good player, and I think she really has a good read on the game. But again, it's like Eric, she has the read in her own way, and she's playing her own style. And so a casual fan watching from home might be like, oh, of course, go with the 3. That makes the most sense. But in reality, she's not making it to Final 3 with Eric and Peih-Gee, and very easily could have gone home at 6, just like we see Jessica Lewis do at Final 10 in Millennials versus Gen X, when in reality, all she had to do is flip, and she gives herself a shot to get further in the game and possibly win the damn thing.
Yeah, and I don't think that the editors are particularly like pushing Denise to look stupid, but I do remember watching it and people were thinking like, I don't like, what's Denise's end game here? What's her game plan? We never really quite figured out because that doesn't end up coming into fruition. But I think with this kind of ongoing drama that she'll have with Peih-Gee when it comes to winning these, when it comes to this reward challenge, I think Denise is just Peih-Gee and Todd and Courtney. They are outspoken. They know what they want. They put on the table what they want. Denise doesn't play that way, and that's not her demeanor. So it's easier to assume that she doesn't know what she's doing when that's not the case.
Yeah, and the thing with Denise is she's not playing a 4th place game. She's playing to get to the top 4, and if she gets into the top 3, Denise could win. And I know I've said in podcasts in the past that Denise never had a chance, but when you rewatch it, and I still don't think she beats Todd or Amanda if she gets to the final 3 next to them, or she might even lose to Courtney, but I think that James votes for Denise, therefore that offsets one of the Courtney votes, and now Courtney has 1 vote. So there's a chance that she could win, but I don't think she would. But she still was playing the game to win. She had to get to Final 4 before she could do anything else, because the way that the tribe started to break down. Now, if she doesn't get rid of James at Final 7, and instead they get rid of Eric Huffman. Now at final 6, her and James and Peih-Gee could possibly try to make a move and maybe pull in somebody else. But there's no way to make a move at this point. She's got to just suck it up, get to final 4, and try to beat 3 pretty bad challenge competitors at the end of the day. I mean, Courtney wins an immunity. Up until now, Todd and Amanda both have not won an immunity. And Todd was close in this last one, but pretty much because Eric got stuck and that was really it. I mean, Todd was like the only semi-physical threat in this challenge. It's hilarious because if James plays an idol, this challenge was literally made for James Clement, because even if he doesn't know the Chinese history, he still could have done that course 6 times before anybody else did it 3.
Yeah, this one is not this hides as a knowledge test. This is an endurance challenge, because as long as you're generally quick, and you see, I mean, pretty much everyone, they're like walking the whole time after the like 2nd or 3rd lap back. But yeah, I mean, also James's stride is triple that of anybody else's, even Eric's. So I think you're right. It doesn't even matter what you get right and what you get wrong. This is another one where I think Peih-Gee benefits.
Well, yeah, and I actually wanted to bring up one more thing on James there. Remember, in Heroes Villains, when he had one leg, he still almost won this over Colby and Tom. Or had Tom gone home. Tom might have gone home, but he still almost won this over Colby for the individual immunity to be safe on the Heroes Tribe. And he had one leg, and his other leg was completely straight because he couldn't bend it. So imagine if he's running on 2 legs. He's going to win this one in a landslide. But yeah, Peih-Gee totally benefits because Todd was absolutely taking shots in the dark. Now, the one thing that they do in the past seasons, I'm pretty sure on the seasons now, but they don't really talk about it as much, they would get a book or a pamphlet that would say, like, read this before you go on Survivor. It would have the rules. It would have the history of the country you're going to. It would give you more information. So I guarantee you, all of the information that they are getting there, they had seen at one point before this if they read what Survivor gave them. However, I can almost also guarantee that after 32 days of starving, you probably forgot every single word that you read that day.
Right. Because I was wondering that, because some of the things were like the Chinese invented barbed wire. And I was like, I don't know how anyone would know that offhand. Even Peih-Gee, who's of Chinese descent. So that makes sense that they sort of had a like quote unquote like wilderness guide.
Yeah. Yeah, and they do, and obviously we don't really hear that, and it is what it is. But yeah, Peih-Gee wins it. And it's one of those two, like when I always go back, like I had Peih-Gee in my top 100. Peih-Gee says I shouldn't put her ahead of any winners, but then again, Amber and Chris Underwood shouldn't be winners, so what do I care? And so when I watch this, like Peih-Gee is the ultimate nuisance in Survivor history. Like she really is, in my opinion,
she's like that thorn.
Yeah, there's got to be. We should do a Patreon podcast where we do like the top 10 nuisances in Survivor history. Like the player that just won't go away. Like Terry Dietz is probably the king of that because of the Kasaya 6. And even though he's viewed as a hero, to them, he literally is the ultimate virus.
All right, we're going to do this virus. That's even more topical, Phil. Good job. Maybe, okay, we're doing that for February. Valentine's Day, rose, thorns, biggest thorn inside. I'm writing that down. Perfect.
I was going to say, because if we do it the virus way, it's looking like we might not have much more time on our hands. Hopefully, all these vaccines coming out. I don't know if we're going to have much more time to really milk the whole virus thing. Although Grey's Anatomy is about to put out an entire season based on COVID, which is just what we need. We just need a season of straight COVID to remind us about. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but COVID.
Life. The life season we are living of COVID.
Brutal. But I think that's a really funny idea, because that's why I put Peih-Gee in my top 100. And I think I was the only one to put Peih-Gee in my top 100. But there's just something about a player who can scrap and scrap and scrap and scrap. I mean, Chris Doherty is another one. Like just scraps his way all the way through Vanuatu, which is a pain in the ass, but he does it. And there's just something to be said for those players, because I always look at it as like Peih-Gee should have been one of the first 2 boots. When this cast was made, Peih-Gee Law was built to be one of the first boots of this season. Chicken goes home. That was not expected by Survivor. So now Peih-Gee survives that one. Dave and Ashley have their fight. Ashley goes home. Peih-Gee still should go home before Dave because their tribe is so weak. And what is Peih-Gee really doing? Peih-Gee is also aggravating to a lot of the players out there. Pretty much all of them cannot stand Peih-Gee. However, she is now in the final 5 of the season, all by her own will. And I think that's what's so impressive. Yes, there are other things that need to happen in order for her to get there. She needs Todd and Amanda and Courtney to say, let's get rid of James, all of that. But she wins immunities. She battles her way through it. She puts targets on Jean Robert. She gets on board with voting out James. And she's a great thorn in the side. And you know what? If she wins, and obviously we all know she ends up going home at Final Five, but if she were to somehow get past that Final Five, the last person you want in Final Four is Peih-Gee, because if it is any type of mental thing, she's going to beat all of you. And I forget what the Final Four challenge of the season is, but if she gets to Final Three, her friends are all on the jury, and Jean Robert and James are pissed off at all of you.
Yeah, and that's the thing with those kind of thorny players is everyone hates them until they get to the end, and then it's like, well, you did it, so here's all the money. And you mentioned like Peih-Gee wins immunity here. Peih-Gee at the beginning, like, and it's probably because Jean who loses so much. I forget that Peih-Gee is like good at certain types of challenges, and she really shines in the second half of this season, but she's not like floating around and, you know, isn't able to hold her own. She's winning immunities and she's playing. So it's great. I had a much better appreciation for Peih-Gee watching this now than watching it live. And I like regret how I felt watching it live because I couldn't stand her. I thought she was
everybody hated her.
She is a pain. She would self-admittedly say that she's a pain in the ass on the season. But you appreciate, like, I root for her now.
And it's the same thing like when we had Aris, when we were talking to Aris on when we did the ALS thing. I said to Aris and Terry, I'm like, Aris, how could Survivor edit you to seem like the dick on this season? It's like, I would have thought I was the dick on this season. And it's like, but you're not. And when you rewatch the season, you realize Terry's just as much a pain in the ass as Aris, but when you watch it the first time, you feel like Terry is your lens. That's who you're watching for. And it's the same thing with this season. Because you fall so in love with Amanda, James, Courtney, Todd, you forget that, like, you think Peih-Gee is the villain. Peih-Gee's really not the villain. Yes, she is annoying, but also everybody else was probably equally annoying to her. And what really sets it off is that she throws the challenge. If she does not throw that challenge, Peih-Gee Law is probably considered a hero. But because she throws that challenge and Aaron goes home because of it, and then she plays up like she didn't throw the challenge after admitting she did throw the challenge, you can't recover from that because now people see a hypocrite, people see somebody who's sneaky, people see somebody who is a liar, you know, and that frustrates an average normal viewer. So it's a shame, but yeah, Peih-Gee absolutely is a top 100 Survivor player, and throw out her Cambodia game. I don't really care about that game. She got put on the wrong tribe to start with, and it is what it is. She never had a chance from the word go because she started on a tribe with Vetus and Shireen and Jeff Varner and Abby. Like, how is that the tribe? But I digress.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think where to go from here because we just gave our big swan song to Peih-Gee, who hasn't gone home yet. What do you think? Oh, okay. I actually want to go to the very, very beginning. I wrote down this first note I took. I said that Todd gets quote unquote confessional credit for getting rid of James. We talked about this last week, and you watched that, like, this is Amanda's idea. Yada, like, Todd hops in on it. In this, Todd is the one talking about how great it is to have gotten rid of James. It is not Amanda, and I didn't even know what reading the edit meant back when I was watching this live, but this to me is the most abundantly clear clue that Todd wins.
And it's exactly what happened with Tommy and Lauren in season 39. And it's why it's a problem when you dissect the game the way that you and I do.
Yeah.
That you notice these trends in Survivor history. And they go all the way back to day one with Richard Hatch sitting on the tree saying, I already have the $1 million check written. It goes all the way back right to the first episode of the show ever. And when you see this happen, yeah, in season 15, people weren't dissecting it the way we are. Sure, Sucks existed, but people would go on Sucks and they would say whatever they had to say, and that was it. But now, when you have podcast after podcast, and you have Wes and Peridium doing their breakdowns of the top 10 moments or the stories or whatever, you look for these types of moments, and it's so obvious when you actually look for those moments, because this is the exact example that I gave when Molly Byman went home, because Lauren came up with the idea and the next episode didn't get a confessional and Tommy got all the credit for it.
Yeah.
And up until that point, why were we hearing from Tommy? Of course, Tommy's going to go on in the season. And that's exactly what happens here. Amanda comes up with the idea, but because Todd goes on to win the game, he gets all of the credit in this moment.
Yeah, he really does. It's wild. And we've talked about this so much with Amanda, but it's like you look back and you're like, no, Amanda was a huge part of this season. And sure, we're now at the final 6 and she's around, but she's not even getting credit for her own move. So it's just so obvious. And the Amanda legend really kind of strictly at this point comes from Micronesia.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Because Micronesia Amanda is phenomenal. There's no denying it. I mean, all the women who play on Survivor Micronesia are phenomenal. I'm talking every single one of them, even the pre-mergers, all of the women on that season
Rest
just
in peace.
bring it day in and day out. Maybe with the exception of Kathy Slackman, but whatever. But and I think that's what's kind of funny about this season is I'm still sitting there and I'm watching this and when you're like, oh man, Amanda's playing such a good game. Like she's got to beat Courtney. Like every time you're like, they must have just read the wrong vote. They must have. But at the same time, Courtney gets one more vote and she ties Todd, and Amanda might even sit down and vote for Todd or Courtney at the end if she really wants to. Like we don't know. And that's what's so fascinating about China. It's when they're sitting in the water talking about how they're going to be the cutest final 3 ever, and it's going to be so great. And you're like, it kind of is the most unprecedented final 3 in history. And to this day, it's still the greatest final 3 in history. And only in that final 3 could Amanda Kimmel finish 3rd place. It's the only final 3 in the history of the show where she could finish 3rd place. Because if you replace her with one other person on any other season, she finishes at least 2nd, including Heroes Villains. She beats Parv if she makes it the final 3 of Heroes Villains, because she would have beaten Sandra too. She would have won the whole game because everybody on the jury would have been a hero. So that's the thing. Like only on this season could Amanda Kimmel get 3rd place. Now, maybe in Micronesia, she might because Sari steals votes or whatever it is, but who knows? You could dissect it any way you want. It's just the fact of the matter. Like it's unbelievable. And you know what? You can make the argument why Todd and Courtney are better players than Amanda. And I think that's what's so interesting about this season. And also what's such a shame for Amanda, even though she's so overrated in the community, I won't ever feel bad for her. But really, at the end of the day, if we dissected this in the moment, we would not be loving Amanda as much as we do because we watch her on back-to-back seasons and see what she's able to do on season 16.
Yeah, I think we have this like, oh my God, like Amanda's it's kind of like the Kelly Wentworth thing. It's like the first, except not as extreme, but like Kelly Wentworth becomes a legend hero, whatever word you want to use, after Cambodia. I think, and again, I was watching this live and did not care about legendary status at that time, but I think I fell in love with Amanda at the end of Micronesia. I was watching this season and I was loving everyone. Amanda did not particularly stick out to me.
Well, it's the same thing with Parv. You can make the same argument for Parv. Yeah. It wasn't her first time.
It was her
second time.
The entire Cook Islands cast.
Yeah, Jenna Lewis, who nobody really is in love with, but nobody respected her first game. They only talk about her second game. So it's kind of funny how some of these people that like have kind of worked their way into, the show's like Rushmore conversation really didn't do anything the first time, or when they did, we didn't really get it presented to us in the way that we really wanted it to. Whereas Sari, from the moment she stepped on the beach, we all loved Sari. Like, even though I think Terry still was more of like the popular player there, Terry and Sari, you're talking about Rupert and Johnny Fairplay. You know what I mean? You're talking about 2 of the upper echelon, characters in the history of the show who people just fell in love with immediately. You don't get that with Amanda on this season. And Todd owns the screen this season. Todd owns it, and Courtney is such a bitch, and it's great. And that's the best part about it. And she says it, when she's talking about that, she's like, oh, I hope that I'm not wrong here. And it's like, but you are, and you now sound like an ass, but also you're Courtney, and we love you for it. Congrats. Yeah. You just made fun of somebody for crying about their sister having an abortion, and yet still we're like, we hope you play again. Please come back. Like, it's insane. And next episode, she's about to start crying about welfare. I mean, she's unbelievable, and yet we still root for her.
Exactly. And I was thinking about this as you were talking. Like, this is a season where if we watched it in our present like brains for the first time, I don't think we would like it as much because we would make such a stink about how obvious it was that Todd wins. And obviously you love all the characters, you love Todd, but it's just not as good when it's obvious. And I'm so glad that I was able to enjoy this season with a very different brain than the one I have now.
Although I will say, I still think if you're not dissecting it, you still think Amanda's going to win because Rachel thinks Amanda's going to win. She thinks. I mean, that's what she thinks. First of all, she thought it was going to be James. Duh.
Sad.
And now she thinks
it's the like kingpin, and it's like normally one gets rid of the kingpin.
He's going to go at some point. And even if he gets to the end, they're going to think he's too much of a snake to actually give him the votes to win. Because up until this point, if you really think about it, up until this point, and there had not been a snake who had won the game. Brian Heidick did, but that's because he sat next to Clay Jordan. That's different.
Right.
But other than that, it was always kind of the good defeated evil. And people would argue Hatch defeating Wigglesworth wasn't necessarily that, but Wigglesworth was considered the snake, or was considered the rat, whatever it was, it didn't matter. And so when you really look at it, it's like Yul beat Ozzy. Yul doesn't have a blemish on his record. Ozzy pre-merge a little sketchy. Aris beats Danielle. Aris was always kind of seen as like the golden boy, even though, he was what he was. So Danny defeating Stephanie. Like, if you really go back through this, it was always kind of the person who had any blemishes on their resume normally lost. Lex Vandenberg loses. Rob Cesternino loses. It's kind of fun to see a player like that be able to pull it out, and especially over. I mean, I think I had Courtney at 27 or 28 or something like that in my top 100 players. About 15 spots higher than Amanda, which I think is fair after watching this season. I really do.
Well, she gets more jury votes than Amanda, so I think that alone is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I think so. What did you think about the reward challenge here? It's the loved one visit. I agree. Not a very emotional loved one visit. I kind of like that. It was quick, snappy, get it through, get on with it. I do like that. We get Todd's sister. We get Amanda's sister, has the same exact face as Amanda, just different colored hair and shorter. We get Denise's husband, and their relationship is adorable. We get Courtney's British dad, which is probably my favorite loved one in history. I'm British, darling. I don't wear shorts. That's amazing. And then we get Peih-Gee's dad, who says, "Hi, Peih-Gee, how are you?" And it's like the cutest moment of all time.
Great. Yeah. Doing great, Dad.
And then we get Eric's mom, who, it's Eric and his mom, and there's like no emotion because it's Eric and his mom. What did you think about the actual challenge and then the reward they got to go on?
So one quick thing I know they always put like the most emotional one at the end. Denise and her husband totally get that being at the end. I am surprised that Todd's thing wasn't at the end because it like had the most ripple effect.
I don't think Jeff and them knew. And so they still had to do it in the order because they had to show who was standing over on the side. And if they would have done it at the end, Denise's loved one and stuff wouldn't have been standing over there. And I mean, Jeff, I don't think knew that there was a miscarriage involved.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I like the challenge. I love any kind of blindfold challenge. And I think this challenge is great. I'm going to give Amanda some credit after we just kind of like respectfully trashed her. But Amanda could, like, without missing a beat, just like not only doing the bird sounds, but doing them like really calmly as if this was just like a normal way of talking to someone. I thought that was so good because everyone's screaming, everyone's losing their mind. And then there's just like weird chirping in the background. Yeah. Thought that was really good. I liked it. I thought it was good. I thought the Blackberry was a force, but
the best though.
You do.
Survivor was making millions of dollars back then, so good for them. Yeah, I thought the challenge probably could have been a little bit more interesting. I kind of like the idea of meeting in the middle, but I didn't like that there was no real strategy to it. It was literally just walk straight and hope that you get there and kind of say names or whatever you have to do. Yeah. But I love that Denise and her husband win it because like I always look at it like when you're watching a season like this, like Todd is literally a flight attendant. Todd's probably flying all around the country. He probably isn't doing much internationally, but he totally has the opportunity to do that at some point. Amanda, Miss Montana, I'm sure she's going to be able to do some sort of traveling. At worst, she goes to Canada and she can hang with John Millsap, and then they can have fun or whatever. And then you have like I don't know. You have Courtney, who's a New York waitress. I mean, LaGuardia and JFK are right there. Just fly. Your dad is literally British. But I always love when you get the odd ones out. Like when Denise is talking about her husband is so scared of flying. And you just get on in like a I mean, that's like a 17-hour flight from Boston.
Shitty flight.
Yeah.
He really had to make multiple flights. That Boston does not go direct to China.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely had to land in at least LA and then fly out of LA. So for him to be able to go and have that experience and then like go and sit there. And it's like when the two of them are sitting there and he's like, I think you're going to win this thing. And like, they're sitting there and it's like the wind is blowing, the high grass. And you're just like, this is one of those just like moments where you're like, only Survivor could bring this to these two people. Like these two people would never, ever, ever get an opportunity like this in their lives, let alone to go to China, but to just like have that experience of like being on that boat in the river, eating ribs and whatever they're doing. It's just such a cool thing. And it's so, I love it when, people like Denise and her husband are able to actually pull it out, because I just think it's better. And I like that. I do like that Denise took Amanda and Todd, because she's trying to make the pitch to get the final three. Peih-Gee can be bitter all she wants, but Peih-Gee picked Denise last time strategically. It wasn't because she felt bad for Denise or anything like that. She picked Denise because it was strategic and she was hoping she could get Denise to flip. And now Peih-Gee, being bitter like Peih-Gee is for most of the season, gets really angry and whines and complains. And Denise just has to be like, sorry, it sucks, but I need to take who I need to take so I can win the game.
Well, yeah, it's what we were talking about earlier. Like at this point, Denise has a 0% chance of going home tonight. If she picks anyone other than Todd, Amanda, or Courtney, that percentage suddenly exists. So it's totally the right thing to do. And I'm with you too. Like the whole fish out of water situation it's always good. And I think it's even more accentuated last week when Denise, who like studies martial arts, gets to do that at the Shaolin Temple. Like there's no one else that should have been the one to go there. So as much as Denise kind of stumbles to the finish line here, like I'm happy that she got those experiences, because that brought a very human element to the game.
Absolutely. And when she's talking to her husband, it also lets you know how intelligent Denise is, because she's even saying like, this is kind of what I have to do. Like, I kind of just have to go with these three and hope that I can get in with them. And leaving Courtney out is a smart thing to do. When Peih-Gee's like, why'd you take Amanda? Why'd you take Amanda? Because Amanda made the call on killing James.
Yeah.
If you find out that somebody in your, whatever, I mean, when mobsters used to do hits on each other, I'm sure that if they found out somebody was getting a hit, you probably wanted to try to buddy up with whoever the hell just took a hit on somebody near you, or so you could make the hit on them without them seeing it coming. I mean, I've seen The Godfather. I know how that works. And they just took out James. You know that you were closer to James than any of them were. You have to get back in their good graces. And while Todd is the ultimate kingpin, you got to make sure Amanda's not going to try to take you out at some point. So, it's absolutely the right move. And Courtney has no power. And while I'll say that Courtney's a top 30 player in Survivor history, and have no problem saying that, because she has no business getting where she does in this season or on Heroes versus Villains, and she very easily could have won that game if she makes it one more vote in Heroes versus Villains, I just think that's the right move. You got to take those people in Peih-Gee. I'm sorry, but you have no power. You have zero power, and you just kind of have to deal with that. And it's frustrating because you've had no power since day one, but that's kind of just the way it is on Survivor. Yeah,
totally. And the last note I have is that they came back with chocolate on their fingers. I always love that. Or it's kind of just like pooled in their hands, which is even grosser.
Nice sweaty, dirty river water on their hands, and then they're licking off the.
I love that. I don't quite know what season they stop allowing them to bring back foods. But we were just talking about this in our retrospective with Celestina, but like Nalia and Marquez is like spitting out a mint. Like in Vanuatu, the girls bring back half-eaten chicken wings for the guys. Like that stuff, it's just so good. And I don't know. I actually think that's something that like they should keep, because it does provide random drama sometimes. So, what do I know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think they kind of stopped doing it once the rewards stopped being things where they actually went somewhere. You can't be like, hey guys, go sit over here and eat Chinese food and you can bring it back to the rest of the tribe. It's like, well, then
here's a noodle.
Just have everybody come sit next to us then. Like, what's the point of winning a reward at that point? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These rewards were legit. And I guess they couldn't bring back ribs, probably because it looked like everybody ate every single rib imaginable, but that chocolate cake was ridiculous. And I loved Eric and Courtney just going all in, no shame. Absolutely loved it.
So good.
Yeah. So all in all, it's a boring boot, but again, it goes back to what I love about old school Survivor is that it wasn't always about the boot, and I think nowadays they try so hard to make it seem like every episode is a blindside, when 95% of the time it's not a blindside. Even when the person coming off says, I was totally blindsided, everybody else is like, dude, they were going home the whole time. They were just delusional. That's their problem. There's a difference between, being blindsided the way James was blindsided and being blindsided the way that, I don't know, Brendan Shapiro was blindsided. I don't even know if Brendan Shapiro was blindsided, but like if he says he was, like it was pretty obvious you were going home, man. Like there was nothing else you could do. And so that's kind of what I'm saying is like I like that we had a breakdown after somebody gets blindsided. We have a fun reward challenge with the loved ones. We have a fun reward visit. We have a lot of conversation about strategy. There's nothing involving idols. It's pretty clear Eric's going home the whole time, but they do a good job of making it seem like, hey, there might be a little bit of hope. Could Denise possibly flip? Makes sense she doesn't, but I like this kind of episode, and I miss the old school element where they just kind of lived and did what they had to do, and they licked chocolate off each other's fingers rather than every time, oh, well, they took this person, so now I'm going to go find an idol so I can play it on them. It's like, isn't it amazing though? And this is the truth. James goes home last episode with 2 idols. This episode, I think idol was mentioned one time, and it was because it was like, well, now there's no idols in play. And then they could have an entire episode where the conversation was just about normal things. How can we strategize to make this work? How can we talk about getting the final 3, final 4, whatever? And you don't lose anything by not talking 100% about, well, if I find an idol, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Like that's the whole plot line of seasons 30 through 40 is, will I find an idol and how do I find it?
Yeah. And that you save like at least 10 minutes of just like, so I woke up at 4 a.m. with everyone else, and then we went digging, and then happy music happened, and then Alexa has an idol. Like it's just so predictable. It's
so predictable. It's the same thing every single episode. It's almost become like a reward challenge or an immunity challenge where it's just a part of the episode every time. And it's not exciting, and it's fun to watch these older episodes where you can get through and strategize and do whatever you have to do without doing any of that, which is really fun and really enjoyable. And I mean, I like this episode. I mean, again, if this is the worst episode of Survivor China, that's why Survivor China is the best season of all of them. Although I would probably argue the Frosty Boot is probably the worst episode of the season.
That one's a lot worse. This one's just the obviously the characters are incredible. There is a noticeable lack of James in this.
Yeah, it's true.
Which
you know what? I think that just builds the legend of James. And that's why he wins fan favorite. I mean, I always go to the the easiest is The Godfather. I don't know, Alexa, and I'm going to make my second Godfather reference here, but in the first 2 Godfathers, people always argue which one's actually the better movie. And what ends up happening is at the end of the second one, they do a scene where the whole family's together and Sonny Corleone's there. And you realize, no, the first one's the better movie because Sonny's in the movie. And the second one can't be that. And James has that level. Rupert has that level. Now, Rupert is able to be made up for because Johnny Fairplay is absolutely ridiculous. But, there's those noticeable characters. There's those Sonny Corleone characters who, when they're gone, you feel it. You really feel it because now everything else has to recover. And you're like, okay, who do I latch onto? Because that's who I latched onto. And James might be the biggest one in the history of the show. Mm-hmm. He really might be because I totally agree. I mean, even with all these great characters, you're like, man, where's James? And when he's sitting over there, you're like, he should be over there. Go over there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, again, you have Courtney, you have Todd, you have really good characters. You have Peih-Gee who's making you feel something. It's just obvious without him.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Well, that's how we feel about that. We'll be doing episode 5 or the final 5 next week. And then it's the finale. I always forget that this finale is only a final 4, which means there's only one boot in the finale. Very interesting.
I love that. I miss that so much.
I know. It's interesting though.
So we'll be back next week at probably the same time for Survivor China. Cause Thanksgiving's kind of screwing everything up. So next week we'll be back probably at 5:30 Eastern for Survivor China Final 5 recap. Right after this, I'm going to be joined by McKenna Feeney. We're going to continue our Australian Survivor Season 2 recap. We're going to recap episodes 4 and 5. And then this coming Wednesday, Phil will not be joining me for The Amazing Race, and I am figuring out who my guest will be. So probably will be a familiar face, but that's all. So for those of you who are only listening to this, we hope you have a great Thanksgiving. But tune in right after this for Australian Survivor. And as always, become a patron at patreon.com/Survivor Specialists.